Hello, Geoff Evans from the Humane Society International. Could you explain to me your organisation, what you're doing here?
Yeah, Humane Society International is, along with its partner organizations, one of the largest animal protection organizations in the world. And while we work to protect all animals, I'm here particularly to work on farm animal issues and just to make sure that the welfare of farm animals aren't forgotten in these negotiations.
So what linkages are you doing with other organisations?
Well, we've developed this set of policy recommendations with the World Society for the Protection of Animals as well as Compassion in World Farming that outlines some of the proposals that we think need to be implemented both on national and international scales.
What would that be, and how is that relevant to the COP?
So animal agriculture, a lot of people don't know, is one of the largest contributing sectors to climate change, and the FAO estimated that it contributes about 18% of global human-induced emissions.
18%?
18, yeah. And animals play vital roles in the welfare, in people's lives all throughout the world. And these are sentient beings, so they can feel emotion, experience pain, and the way you decide to raise them or handle them can really cause suffering depending on how you do so. So in negotiations, they're finally deciding to talk about agriculture, and they're talking about it with reference to other social goals like food security and rural development, and that's great, but they shouldn't also forget other social goals, including farm animal welfare. And so when you decide to mitigate climate change from this sector, it's appropriate considering its large contributions. You should also consider how those proposals affect the welfare of the farm animals.
And what are your worries at the moment?
Well, there are several. One is just that people aren't talking about the issue at all in terms of welfare. And so you need to at least raise awareness so people know that the way you treat the animals really does have an impact on the way they feel. And the other thing is that people don't want to talk about the fact that if you reduce your consumption of animal products, you can reduce your impact on climate change. A number of studies have shown this. A more recent one is from India and showed that an Indian diet that included mutton was 1.8 times the amount of GHGs than a vegetarian diet, for example. And so one is just that in developed countries and in developing countries where there's a rising urban middle class population with similar obesity problems, we would advocate that you can reduce consumption and also have an impact on lessening climate change. But to address your question more directly in terms of concerns with some of the proposed options, one category has to do with manure management and biodigesters, for example. And the CDM, whose booth is very near us, has some proposed projects or actual projects that are for large-scale animal operations, and they have biodigesters which cover manure lagoons and take the gas, and you can use that gas as a renewable energy source. The problem with this is the scale. When you advocate these types of operations and you give them policy supports like this, it makes it cheaper to do what they're doing, and it also can make it more difficult for the smaller producers that don't get these supports. And when you advocate for these larger operations, that can have an impact on by pushing smaller farmers out of the market, for example, which has happened even in Mexico. A colleague of mine just this week went on a tour of Mexico and looked at an area where this has happened and pushed small farmers out of the market.
How does this relate to animal welfare, though?
So generally the larger operations have more confinement practices, which are some of the things that lead to the worst animal abuses in animal agriculture. So that's the relation there. So if you support the smaller scale agriculture, you're generally going to be supporting the farm animal welfare as well as the rural and smallholder farmers.
So you're pursuing this manure aspect. I can't remember exactly how you referred to it.
Yeah, that's one of the concerns.
And the other concern?
Yeah, there are actually two other ones that I'd like to talk about. One of them has to do with feed changes. So changing feed to reduce in ruminants, for example, methane production from enteric fermentation, and also changing the carbon to nitrogen ratio to reduce nitrogen emissions from manure. And the concern here lies with similar concerns that we have over feeding ruminants too many grains, where we already know that can produce abscesses in their stomachs. And so when you feed an animal what it's not made to eat, you can have problems. And then the other side with these different feeds are trying to increase the efficiency of production so that animals produce more per animal. And the concern there is that in the U.S., for example, and in industrial farming, as you've increased efficiency production, that's also led to some of the worst animal welfare abuses. In dairy cattle, it's been clinical mastitis, for example. Chickens have had bone fractures and the like. So that's kind of the second category. And then the last one, some people are pushing for continued support of a shift towards monogastric species like poultry, chickens. And there have been more of those produced over time. And in fact, I believe about 2/3 of all eggs and poultry meat produced in the world comes from industrialized facilities now. So as you move towards or push towards moving towards these more monogastric species, you have the chance that you'll increase the overall number of farm animals and the confined suffering that they go through in these operations.
So in terms of tackling this last point, what would you hope to see happen?
Well, we just hope to see that people don't encourage that kind of shift, and rather another shift that may be more benign, such as obviously reducing consumption in those areas that it makes sense, but also, for example, improved grassland management can sequester a lot of carbon, and the potential for mitigation there is much higher than these other changes I've been talking about. And that includes also if you take into account carbon pricing and what that might do to the mitigation. We would advocate going down a different route that will also support the smallholder rural farmers, but also farm animal welfare.
Okay. And part of that is this partnership that you've got going with WSPA and Compassion World Farming.
Right. So a lot of the stuff I've talked about is here, and it talks about both considering farm animal welfare and national strategies, and then also here through the UNFCCC processes, so the subsidiary bodies and the long-term cooperative action text, for example. So those are there.
And how will you measure your influence?
Right now, we're just starting to try and raise awareness. So if we can get farm animal welfare into any of these texts, into the negotiations, on negotiators' mind, then we'll feel like we've at least achieved the start to what we want to do for the farm animals.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time, Geoff.
Thank you very much.